Now at 6:30 on Chicago Tonight.
Pryor talks about his new movie tonight at 10.
Programming on Channel 11 is made possible in part by
The latest satellite photo today over the scene of disaster in the Soviet Ukraine. Some Western experts say it indicates the nuclear fire at Chernobyl may finally be out. But many questions, many doubts, many dangers remain. Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Even tonight, there remains no confirmation of Soviet claims nor of eye-in-the-sky satellite evidence that the reactor may no longer be burning, no longer flinging radiation into the surrounding Ukraine and beyond. Moreover, some of the best evidence the accident isn't over comes from a Soviet official, not addressing the Soviet people, but the U.S. Congress. David Martin has the latest.
Let me ask you,
in a spectacle almost as extraordinary as the accident itself, a Soviet official went before a committee of the U.S. Congress today to give Moscow's latest version of the aftermath of the Chernobyl meltdown.
The radioactivity of the territory of the nuclear power station and the surrounding settlement dropped by 1.5 to 2 times. Medical assistance is administered to those affected, of whom 18 people are in a serious condition.
The Russian made clear the crisis has not yet passed.
The accident is obviously not yet all over with. We are still trying to manage the situation, and the situation is improving, but unfortunately it is not yet all over with.
High-resolution photographs taken this morning by a commercial satellite clearly show the reactor, and experts say the damage does not look any worse than it did in pictures taken 2 days ago.
It indicates to me that there hasn't been a great deal of amount of change, physical change in the area in the last 2 days.
Swedish companies say the photo also confirms the Soviet claim that there is no longer a fire spewing radioactive particles into the air. But U.S. experts say the picture does not prove that. More detailed pictures taken this morning by an American spy satellite convinced U.S. officials a fire was still burning.
We think we have a continuing fire.
But later in the day, he seemed less certain.
We do not have information that would confirm that the fire is out, but it is plausible that it is out.
Whether or not the fire is still burning, U.S. officials insist the Soviet claim of only 2 dead is misleading.
Our own pictures give us information that suggests the casualty rates are higher than those that have been announced by the Soviet Union so far.
However, both U.S. and Soviet officials agree there is no evidence to support earlier fears that the adjoining number 3 reactor also suffered a meltdown.
The other area was apparently a construction area near Unit 4. It was not the Unit 3 area.
So there is not a second meltdown in progress?
No, according to the remarks I've made, there is only one plant which was damaged and shut down.
The U.S. Air Force has dispatched planes to monitor radiation levels in the winds coming over the North Pole. And the State Department has requested permission to send medical teams to examine American personnel serving in both the Soviet Union and Poland. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
An American expert on bone marrow transplants today was invited to go to the Soviet Union to try to help any radiation victims. Dr. Robert Gale said he had no idea how many radiation victims there might be. One of the most serious consequences of radiation sickness is bone marrow failure, wrecking the body's immune system and producing defective blood. Dr. Gale's group runs an international registry of thousands of bone marrow donors and performing bone marrow transplants on victims. Dr. Gale said Soviet officials were, quote, anxious for me to come. While the Soviets were admitting over here that the nuclear accident goes on, the only Mayday message over there from the Soviet government-controlled press was blanket coverage of the annual Mayday parade. Wyatt Andrews is in Moscow.
The Soviet Union celebrated its workers today. It is May Day, one of the Soviets' most festive holidays. May Day's coverage included a colorful parade in Kiev, not unusual, along with 2 parades in towns close to the nuclear accident, clearly unusual. But while the communists celebrated being in the Soviet Union, scores of Americans and Europeans celebrated getting out, as students and workers were evacuated from the area of Kiev and reunited at home.
I'll be very glad to be home, but obviously I'd like to get back as soon as possible.
The joy of the reunions was mixed with bitterness. Many students were angry that their trips were interrupted with so few facts available and accused the others of hysteria.
The only written statement we've had is that we were in no danger, and people acted just on impulse, on hysteria, and it's just a completely ridiculous situation.
It's not dangerous. The fire is over. The people in Kiev are perfectly normal, walking around everywhere. And we are going to lose that 2 months of instruction.
What is happening to these students, their evacuation, their fear, and in some cases, their resentment, mimics the general confusion in the rest of the West.
The Soviets, while giving more information today, still held on to their no-need-to-worry approach. Examples, they said radiation levels were down almost 50% without saying what the levels were. They said decontamination work had begun, but did not describe the contamination itself. There was a new casualty count, still 2 dead, but 18 in serious condition. To the Soviets, today was not just normal, it was festive, as if the nuclear accident was behind them, as far away as possible. For many of the students bound for reunions in Europe, that was the idea too. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Moscow.
A one-time Kiev government official familiar with how the Chernobyl reactor site was chosen and now living in the United States today told CBS News correspondent Steve Young why the facility was built so close to major population and food-growing centers.
The pro-argument was based on the fact that there were some nuclear plants in the United States were built close to the cities, closer than that. And every now and then the argument, again, one of the reasons cited for building a nuclear plant was that there was a gap in the race with the United States of how many nuclear plants the United States has versus how many.
Soviet leader Gorbachev had just spent days and weeks doing public relations photo opportunities and arms control proposals by the handful. Much of it was designed to win friends and influence people in Western Europe. Much of that, Bruce Morton reports tonight, has now been blown away by Soviet silence on the scope of the radiation danger and the same old Soviet secrecy wrapped in new packaging.
This is the kind of news event the Soviets like, controlled, everyone doing what he's supposed to be doing. This is the kind of news event the Soviets can't stand.
They have a remarkable way of keeping the lid on. The Russians have this absurd fear that panic will set off the crisis that it did in March 1917, the first revolution.
Under Mikhail Gorbachev, that was supposed to change. Openness was in. The leader pressed the flesh like Western politicians. The Soviet Evening News aired consumer complaints, reported on shoddy production. But when this week's fallout began to spread, new ways went out the window. The lid came down, as it did when the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner, the way it did during an earlier nuclear accident in the 1950s.
This indicates that there is no any kind of openness and sense that censorship is still the same, if not more the case.
The Soviets have paid a political price for their cover-up. European neighbors complained bitterly they knew nothing until the radioactive cloud was overhead. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution deploring Soviet secrecy.
The real crime was that the Soviet Union was refusing to tell their own people.
At that unusual House hearing today, a Soviet diplomat defended silence.
And I would imagine, again, that first there was a desire to see what was really happening and what the consequences of that could be before you make any public announcements.
But the Soviets have paid a political price, and Gorbachev's image of openness is shattered now.
He is in a system that depends on secrecy in almost exactly the same way that President Reagan is in a system that depends on communication.
The United States, faced with a public catastrophe, stayed public. Open investigations by government and news media, which embarrassed the space administration, but cleared the air. The Soviets, faced with an inevitably public catastrophe, chose silence. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
Radiation levels from the Soviet reactor blowout were reported to be dropping in Scandinavia and Europe in general today, less intense and more spread out than at their height. It may be significant to note that the winds today shifted. The United States Department of Agriculture's own Soviet cloud watchers say the radioactivity is now moving southwestward on the wind. The USDA says this weather pattern is expected to last at least 24 to 48 hours. If true, this means radioactivity is heading over some of the Soviet Ukraine's richest farmland, on into Romania, into Hungary, eastern Czechoslovakia, and Austria. Austria is among the countries not letting its guard down today, even with reports that radiation levels may be down. Austria continued to monitor for dangerous radiation levels getting into the food chain.
Presenting 5 incredible things you can do with a new John Deere lawn tractor. You can cut grass more evenly with our new mowing deck. You can get rid of rainwater with our new tip seat. And ride more quietly because we've enclosed the engine. You can even carry heavier loads because we've added more horsepower. But the most incredible thing you can do with a new John Deere tractor is take one home because we've lowered the price. Isn't that incredible?
Oh, a headache now. Anybody seen my extra strength bufferin?
Yeah, my shoulder hurt. Then Kim took it. Sore leg.
It'll help that. Kim, got my bufferin?
Steve does. Got a backache moving scenery.
They all know how good my bufferin is.
Extra strength bufferin for Steve's backache, Kim's legs, John's shoulder, Debbie's headache. It goes to where you hurt fast with an extra strength dose of relief.
Curtain going up.
And I'm ready.
For headaches and a lot more, extra strength bufferin, also in regular strength from Bristol-Myers.
A fuel leak forced NASA to put off today's first rocket launch from Florida since the Challenger disaster. They'll try again tomorrow. The unmanned Delta rocket was to carry a key hurricane-watching satellite into orbit. A top NASA official had said before the scrub, today's launch was important for 2 reasons. Quote, "We need this satellite and we need to remind ourselves that we have had success in the space program," unquote. But CBS News correspondent Eric Engberg has been told tonight that success is about to come in for new questioning and criticism from the Space Shuttle Disaster Investigating Team.
The President's Challenger Commission has uncovered new evidence that NASA managers at the Marshall Propulsion Center had clear danger warnings that a rocket joint might fail, but chose to keep flying and not slow the program. An early draft of the Commission's findings made available to CBS News declares flatly that NASA managers waived more and more safety requirements in an effort to keep abreast of accelerated launch schedules. The Commission has learned that beginning with a shuttle flight in July of 1985 and continuing for the next 5 flights, NASA's Marshall officials issued special restrictions called launch constraints in response to a series of near failures of rocket O-ring seals. In all 6 cases, the paperwork restrictions were officially waived and high-level shuttle managers not informed of the problem. Some Commission members believe this is further proof at least some NASA managers knew the joint was deficient. One Commission member told CBS News, launch constraints mean you don't fly unless you have a specific action to correct a problem. But this problem was not corrected. Why is a question commissioners will have tomorrow for some key NASA employees. They've been called in for an unusual behind-closed-door hearing, called in part because the Commission is not satisfied with some of the often conflicting answers it has heard up to now. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
Libyan television said tonight, no confirmation, no pictures, Libyan television said that a U.S. Air Force helmet with the name Lawrence on it washed ashore about 25 miles west of Tripoli. Captain Paul Lawrence of San Francisco was one of 2 men whose Air Force jet never returned from the U.S. air raids on Libya. British police searched today for at least 23 inmates who escaped during a night of rioting at prisons across Britain. Inmates set fires and took over several prisons. It all started when thousands of guards refused to work overtime. Prisoners were told they'd be locked.
There is a state of general emergency at Plant Vogel.
This was only a drill. No one was hurt. No radiation was released outside the plant. Every commercial nuclear plant in this country has prepared for much worse, with mock evacuation bulletins, mock roadblocks. But the most difficult part of the emergency response plans, evacuation of tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, has never been attempted. And few believe these plans fully protect the public.
The emergency plans are designed to hold population dose down. That's the bottom line. In the worst case sort of accident, they are not designed to prevent casualties completely. They're simply not capable of doing that.
The key requirement is that utilities be able to notify everyone within 10 miles of the plant within 30 minutes of an accident. That's what most drills practice.
Okay, this is a drill.
There is no requirement about how fast people are to be evacuated. Estimates range from 2 hours at Palos Verdes, Arizona, to 12 hours in more populated areas. The state of New York has blocked commercial operation of the Shoreham nuclear plant on grounds that Long Island, with 5 bridges and 2.5 million people, can't be evacuated.
This situation certainly isn't going to soften my resolve to see to it that we have a safe situation.
In Seabrook, New Hampshire, there is one road to handle 200,000 beachgoers in the summer.
We don't want to play nuclear Russian roulette here in Seabrook.
Critics worry most about a plant already in operation, Indian Point, in the New York metropolitan area of 20 million people. The nuclear industry calls all this alarmist.
The emergency plans that are in place with nuclear power plants in this country, I think, are very, very good. And I think the public can be assured that they offer a lot of protection.
Experts say protection only to a point, that a major accident at a plant near a city with the wind in the wrong direction would become a catastrophe. Lisa Myers, NBC News.
There is strong opposition in this country to the construction of more nuclear reactors. That's according to the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. Conducted Tuesday night after most Americans had learned of the Chernobyl accident, the poll shows 65% oppose more nuclear plants. Only 27% are in favor. Public opinion on this issue hasn't changed much over the last few years. In 1982, 63% were opposed to building new reactors.
About the accident, and the West is not buying Soviet explanations like this.
It happened on Saturday, and the governments of proper countries are usually on holidays on weekends.
That we weren't told, and we should have been told.
Beyond the damage to his public diplomacy, however, U.S. analysts say Gorbachev faces other, potentially more serious problems. Soviet oil production and earnings continue to decline. Now the Soviet nuclear industry, the world's most ambitious, has suffered a major setback. And the radioactive fallout from Chernobyl across the rich Ukrainian farmland could increase Soviet dependence on food imports. The combination of these events, experts say, threaten to undermine Gorbachev's top priority, to modernize the sluggish Soviet economy. As one U.S. analyst put it, right now Mikhail Gorbachev is not a lucky man. Rick Deferth, ABC News, Washington.
The disaster at Chernobyl has clearly set people to thinking very hard about the development of nuclear power in this country, and many attitudes have been affected. We've conducted an ABC News poll, and nearly 60% of those we asked said Chernobyl has made them more fearful about the chances of a nuclear accident happening here. An overwhelming majority oppose building any more nuclear plants in this country. Chernobyl has not changed that. The opposition has remained just about steady at that level for 3 years. Well, President Reagan met in Bali today with the Vice President of the Philippines, Salvador Laurel. The meeting apparently was a bit strained. Secretary of State Schultz told reporters afterwards the President made it clear to Mr. Laurel the United States does not have an infinite capacity to provide Manila with money. There was some new and potentially damaging documentation today found regarding the former UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim. ABC's John Martin reports that a German army unit diary written by Waldheim records an order from Adolf Hitler to kill Yugoslav partisans in battle rather than taking them prisoner. Moreover, to kidnap all surviving males for forced labor in Germany. Waldheim has always maintained he knew of no war crimes committed by units with which he served. This order was later cited as a war crime by the Nuremberg Tribunal. When we come back, our series on the crisis in liability insurance. Some communities find life is very different without it.
Thanks to the cake, you get
Said absenteeism ranged from 70 to 100%. Not much work got done anywhere in the country. It was the largest strike of its kind in South Africa's history. In El Salvador today, a Salvadoran military plane supplied by the U.S. crashed on a flight to Panama, killing all 37 people on board. The DC-6 had just taken off from an airbase near San Salvador when it lost power and crashed, apparently because of a mechanical malfunction. Among the casualties, a lieutenant colonel and a major. All of the dead were Salvadorans.
All across this land, Americans are celebrating.
Make this fair pay off.
Expo 86 is a billion-dollar-plus gamble spread along 2 miles of Vancouver's waterfront. The minor risk is that all the paint won't be dry by tomorrow's opening. The big one is that Expo might fail to bring Vancouver the international recognition it's hoping for.
The challenge is to make sure there is life after Expo.
and you don't just have a great big party and then a huge hangover afterwards.
If Expo does lay an egg, it won't be for lack of effort. The organizers have been working on it for 8 years and have brought the world's most glamorous couple to open the 165-day-long exposition tomorrow. Expo's promoters are well aware the last 2 World's Fairs in Knoxville and New Orleans were financial disasters, but they point to a glitzy TV campaign that's produced spectacular results here.
I can tell you that we have sold and have fully paid, and the money's in the bank right now, 13 million visits.
And the money in the bank is increasing daily as the fear of terrorism in Europe, declining gas prices at home, and the weak Canadian dollar make Expo an attractive vacation destination for lots of Americans. Expo will feature more than 100 pavilions and exhibits. The fair's theme is World in Motion, World in Touch, transportation and communication. And there's lots more. Amusement rides for fairgoers of all ages. 5,000 entertainers from 18 nations who give more than 14,000 performances during the run of the fair. Expo will not turn a profit this summer, but in the long run, the organizers say, it'll be the best thing that ever happened to Western Canada. Richard Wagner, CBS News, Vancouver.
As correspondent Bob Simon reports, these are important words for countries on the other rim of the Pacific whose growing economies exist in delicate balance with long-time political realities.
They're beginning to look alike, the American skylines. What's this, Chicago? No, in fact, it's Singapore. And what's this, Atlanta? Wrong again, it's Kuala Lumpur. Cities on the make in hard-working, high-tech Southeast Asia, the fastest growing part of the world. And that's the biggest surprise. Remember, these were the dominoes, and dominoes are supposed to fall. For Americans, Southeast Asia still invokes death and defeat, and it's not just Vietnam. Malaysia had its 10-year war against insurgents in the 50s. Thailand and Indonesia were both threatened by communists in the 60s.
Those were overcome not by good military tactics, but because they developed economic growth and promised people a better life.
A better life, counterinsurgency that works. The governments of Southeast Asia didn't really beat the communists, they bought them out.
We decided that our priorities should be economic development rather than either military buildup against one another or strife.
Instead of foreign troops, foreign investment, attracted by a workforce that was smart, energetic, and cheap. Singapore became the busiest port in the world. The whole area doubled its standard of living in a decade, spurred on by the tragic example of Vietnam.
When they look out and they see how awful Vietnam is, what a disaster it is from the point of view of the populace, most of these countries realize that they will do everything they can to avoid getting into that situation.
But if the dominoes didn't fall, the game isn't over yet. The recession that racked the United States a few years ago has crossed the Pacific. With commodity prices in the cellar and the computer industry over-programmed, there were more empty ships in port.
Not all that long ago, these countries were the plantations of Western Europe. Their laws were written in England and in Holland. Now, after several decades of political independence, they're still at the mercy of foreign legislation, except now the laws are being written in Washington.
We understand you have hundreds of bills before Congress now to protect your industries, and these are going to seriously affect the economies of Southeast Asian countries. There's going to be political instability.
Ethnic and religious hatred still threaten to undermine these new and fragile nations. Malays, Indians, Chinese, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists. Nobody riots when everybody's making money, but if the prosperity stops, it could all come apart. The skyscraper watches over the Selangor Turf Club in Kuala Lumpur. These nations have all placed their bets exactly where Americans and Europeans told them to, on free trade, free enterprise, on sprinting their goods to open Western markets. All they can do now is hope that no one has changed the rules. Bob Simon, CBS News, Kuala Lumpur.
And that's the CBS Evening News for this Thursday. Dan Rather reporting from New York. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
In Alamance County, North Carolina, Honda lawnmowers are a...
From Chicago's news team, this is the Channel 2 News at 6.
Good evening. It's the end of a Chicago institution. Playboy has announced that it is closing its owned and operated Playboy clubs, including the one right here in Chicago. Phil Ponce reports live now that the problem is the very unromantic matter of money. Phil?
That's right, Bill. It was a tradition here for more than a quarter of a century. The very first Playboy Club opened in Chicago back in February of 1960. But the popularity of the clubs nationwide has gone full circle, and today the company announced that next month this and other Playboy-owned and operated clubs will cease to exist. The Playboy Club in Lincoln Park is the club's third incarnation in Chicago. The first one opened in 1960 and attracted 50,000 members in the first year alone. But the popularity of Playboy clubs eventually faltered. Many critics said the clubs and their bunny inhabitants were woefully out of date. Late last year, Playboy tried to fix all that by spending millions to update its New York club and by trying out male waiters called rabbits. Playboy's Empire Club in New York was supposed to be a prototype for the one here and the one in Los Angeles.
We gave New York our best shot, and unfortunately it wasn't accepted as well as we thought it would be. In terms of the future of Playboy in big cities, we'll just have to wait and see.
Today's decision to close the three clubs came after Playboy posted third-quarter losses of $3.2 million, practically all of it coming out of the club division. Club employees say it's sad to see a tradition like this come to an end.
It's not the same as it used to be. I mean, it's still nice and everything, but the times have changed.
I think now, and especially in Lincoln Park in this area, the type of people that like to go out around here are younger, and the type of people that were geared toward Playboy were older.
The whole enthusiasm with sexual freedom and nudity is over. I mean, you don't have to come to the Playboy Club to see girls half naked anymore.
Now, there are Playboy Club franchises still in existence in 3 small American cities, and there are also 4 franchises in Japan, but there won't be any clubs that are owned and operated by Playboy itself in any major American city, and for a lot of people, that is a sad tale. Back to the newsroom.
Okay, thank you, Phil. The Chicago White Sox tonight have agreed to go along with the proposed new sports stadium on the near south side of Chicago. That now leaves the Bears still to be courted by Mayor Washington. The Bears are needed to clinch that deal, and they would have to get out of their current lease at Soldier Field. The Sox have warned for some time that they will leave the city if they can't find a suitable stadium to replace Comiskey Park. But the Sox won't share a stadium with the Cubs, who've indicated that they'd rather stay at Wrigley Field anyway.
The staff at a radio station in Gary, Indiana had quite a scare this morning while WLTH radio was on the air. A violent off-air argument erupted between 2 women visiting the station. One of the women allegedly pulled a gun and began threatening the station's news director when he tried to intervene. Some of the fight was heard on the station by their listeners. It did not stop until the police arrived. No charges have yet been filed, but the women are threatening to take each other to court.
Police and Coast Guard crews saved the lives of a Michigan couple today offshore from Chicago's Burnham Harbor. Brian Rooney reports on a rescue in rough water.
The trouble started at 10:30, and by noon the yacht Dream Circle was swamped a few miles offshore. 4-foot waves were breaking over its cabin, and a pack of Coast Guard and rescue boats could do nothing but stand by and watch the 55-footer sink. Meanwhile, the owners Richard and Marie Donker and their dog Babette had reached shore on a Chicago police boat.
It was rough. We were probably in 6-foot seas, and I really think we hit something, you know, a deadhead or something, because the water came in so fast it couldn't, and the boat, in my opinion, was in very good shape. But I really think that we hit a deadhead, and it just put a hole in the boat, and that's that.
When I realized he wasn't kidding, he was serious, and I looked forward, I went down into the main salon, and there was water in the galley. You know, the carpet was, and it didn't take long. We must have popped a plane.
The Donkers left this morning from St. Joseph, Michigan, headed for Chicago. Their boat started going down at the bow about 10 miles out. And after rescuers arrived,
the
couple had intended to dock their boat here in Burnham Harbor and spend a month attending trade shows at the McCormick Center. They got here, their boat didn't. It was a 1959 wooden-hulled Chris Craft Constellation, very similar to this, worth about $125,000. As the boat went down offshore, reality was just sinking in onshore.
I'll have my heart attack tonight.
The Dream Circle took several hours to sink. It finally went down in 50 feet of water just after 2 o'clock. Brian Rooney, Channel 2 News.
Adlai Stevenson, the independent candidate for governor, has picked a running mate for lieutenant governor, 37-year-old Michael Howlett Jr. Howlett has already resigned as Cook County Associate Circuit Judge. The formal announcement will be made on Monday. Stevenson had been nominated, of course, as the Democratic candidate for governor, but he bolted that ticket when Mark Fairchild, a follower of political extremist Lyndon LaRouche, was voted in as his running mate. Chicago has a new alderman tonight. Luis Gutierrez took the oath in a special ceremony outside the mayor's office late this afternoon. Residents of the West Side's 26th Ward elected Gutierrez Tuesday, and today dozens of supporters came in to cheer him. Gutierrez is the council's 4th Hispanic alderman. The other alderman elected in Tuesday's runoff, Marlene Carter of the 15th Ward. She will be sworn in 2 weeks.
Former Mayor Jane Byrne today debuted a new series of television campaign commercials. The ads hit hard at Mayor Washington's record on economic development and a rising crime rate.
Under Byrne, crime was down. Under Washington, crime is up. And in the last 2 years, assaults are up over 20%. It was known as America's most livable city under Byrne. Now it's Beirut on the lake.
Let's all work together and get Chicago moving again.
As political editor Mike Flannery reports tonight, the ads are another step in Byrne's long campaign for office.
The former mayor spoke to students on the Southwest Side today. When she put on a school T-shirt they had given her, there were loud cheers. Shortly after that school assembly, Byrne was back downtown, unveiling her new television commercials for reporters.
Under Byrne, crime was down. Under Washington, crime is up.
The commercials claim that Chicago's police protection is down, while crime is up. Mayor Washington declined in a series of public appearances to respond to Byrne's charges. Earlier, he did tell WBBM News Radio 78 that the city cannot afford its currently budgeted level of police manpower, and he hinted that cutbacks may be coming. One reason for all of this activity so far in advance of next year's election is to establish Jane Byrne as Harold Washington's chief challenger. Byrne said today that she would much prefer to have no one else run against the mayor. But a raft of other potential contenders may toss their hats into the ring. They include State's Attorney Richard Daley, Northwest Side Alderman Roman Puczynski, Park District Superintendent Edmund Kelly, former U.S. Attorney Dan Webb, and former Governor Richard Ogilvie. Whatever they do, Byrne says it won't faze her at all. On the Channel 2 News at 5 o'clock, she told Walter Jacobson that she'll be focusing her fire on the mayor himself.
I am going after the office of mayor, yes, and I am going to go after Mayor Washington's record because I think it is an abominable record, and I think the city of Chicago deserves much better than what it's getting.
Well, one thing for sure that the city is going to get is another very hard-hitting campaign. Byrne is going to spend more than $150,000 on these commercials in the next few weeks. In one of them, by the way, she speaks entirely in Spanish, a language that she says that she's been studying for several years, Bill.
Well, a whole new voter bloc out there. But what about crime? She says in one of the early statements that crime